It started with a confession, not one whispered in the dark or scrawled in a diary, but a confession that cut through years of silence, pain, and secrets. Trevor Engelson never expected the world to care about his past. He was a Hollywood producer, not a prince. He didn't live in palaces or wave from balconies. But he once held the heart of a woman who would, Meghan Markle. And the story of why they never had a child together is not just tragic, it's shattering. But before we continue, please subscribe and turn on the notification bell for updates. Before the royal titles, before the media wars, before the polished speeches and carefully staged photos, there was Trevor, the man who thought he'd found his forever. But forever turned into fragments the moment truth entered the room. And that truth? That's what Trevor finally decided to reveal. Not to destroy her, but because heartbreak doesn't disappear. It festers, it whispers, it demands to be heard. Have you ever wondered what happens when love collides with a secret too heavy to share? When two people who once laughed together start speaking in silences instead? That was Trevor and Meghan, two rising stars in Hollywood's glow, trapped in the quiet collapse of their own story. He wanted a family. She wanted something else. And somewhere between ambition, pain, and fear, everything broke. But what did Meghan fear so much? Why did the topic of children bring tension instead of joy? And what did Trevor mean when he said, years later, that her pain was deeper than anyone could imagine? This isn't tabloid gossip. This is a love story that unraveled long before the world noticed. A story that began in private joy and ended in public mystery. Picture this. Los Angeles, early 2010. Meghan Markle, young, radiant, freshly cast in suits. Trevor Engelson, steady, creative, deeply in love. They were that couple. The one everyone admired. She was driven. He was grounded. Together, they were building something real. Or so he thought. Behind closed doors, they planned everything. A wedding in Jamaica, a home in LA, a life full of travel and laughter. They joked about baby names once. Trevor wanted something classic. Meghan teased him for being old-fashioned. She said she wasn't ready, that her career was finally taking off. And he believed her. Because love makes you believe. It makes you patient. It blinds you just enough to miss the cracks forming under the surface. He waited and waited, but every time he brought it up, the air in the room changed. Her smile tightened. Her eyes darted away. She'd shift the conversation, make a joke, or pretend she didn't hear. Trevor didn't push. He thought she just needed time. But deep down, something in him began to ache. Because love shouldn't feel like walking on eggshells every time you dream aloud. When he proposed, he imagined their future. A family, Sunday mornings, laughter echoing through hallways. But even on their wedding day, there was something off. Meghan looked stunning, glowing in white. Yet her eyes, he'd later say, seemed distant. As though part of her was already somewhere else. And maybe she was. Because Meghan was chasing something bigger than love. Control. Control over her image. Control over her narrative. Control over what the world could and could not know. She'd learned early in Hollywood that vulnerability could be weaponized. That one crack in your armor could ruin everything. And Trevor, unknowingly, was asking her to expose the deepest crack of all. But what was it she was hiding? Why did the idea of motherhood, something she'd later talk about with the world, feel like a ghost haunting their marriage? Over time, the laughter faded. The dinners turned quiet. And the space between them grew louder than words. He tried to reach her, to understand. But she always found a way to avoid the truth. Sometimes she blamed her schedule. Sometimes she said she wasn't sure about bringing a child into such a competitive world. But then came the nights when she'd cry for no clear reason, staring at the ceiling as if wrestling with something unspoken. Trevor didn't know it yet, but those tears weren't about him. They were about something she couldn't change, something her body, her past, or her fear had already decided for her. In Hollywood, people talk. And whispers travel faster than love. There were murmurs about doctors, private visits, and treatments. Friends claimed she was managing something personal. Trevor brushed it off, until the silence became undeniable. Have you ever sensed someone slipping away, even while they're right beside you? He'd reach for her hand, and feel her fingers tense. He'd mention the future, and she'd glance down at her phone. The warmth was gone. And so was she. Emotionally, long before she packed her bags. Still, Trevor stayed. He loved her too much to believe it was over. He convinced himself that if he gave her space, she'd come back to him. But space only gave her time to decide she wouldn't. Because Meghan wasn't just leaving a marriage, she was shedding a version of herself. The struggling actress. The woman tied to a man who knew her before fame. The woman who couldn't give him the one thing he longed for. And that truth, that quiet, unbearable truth, is what Trevor carried for years. Even when Meghan became a duchess. Even when she talked about family, children, and compassion in front of millions. He stayed silent. Until recently. Until someone asked the question that everyone had been too polite, or too afraid, to ask. Why didn't you and Meghan ever have kids? He could have dodged it. He could have smiled, changed the subject, given the polished Hollywood answer. But he didn't. Because time had turned his pain into something heavier than silence. He said, softly, "It wasn't that we didn't want to. It's that we couldn't." And with that, a decade of speculation shattered. People leaned forward. Reporters froze. Because behind that single sentence was a story the world wasn't ready to hear. He didn't blame her. He didn't expose her. He just spoke from the ache that never healed. He said she struggled with things she never talked about, even to him. That sometimes love meets a wall you can't climb, no matter how hard you try. And in that moment, you could almost feel the world pause. Because for the first time, Trevor wasn't the ex-husband left behind. He was the man who loved someone broken by her own fears and biology. Meghan, he said, wasn't cruel. She was scared. Scared of being seen as weak. Scared of losing everything she'd worked for. Scared that her truth would ruin her image. And maybe that's why she built walls so high that not even love could reach her. When she left, Trevor didn't fight. He just let her go. Because how do you fight someone who's already gone? He packed up the memories, the photos, the quiet dreams of parenthood, and moved on. Years later, when the world called her Duchess Meghan, Trevor remained silent. He never sold stories. He never cashed in on her fame. But silence, as we know, isn't the absence of truth, it's the echo of it. And now, as pieces of that truth begin to surface, the world is starting to ask new questions. Not just about what ended their marriage, but about what Meghan endured and concealed long before she wore a tiara. Because if Trevor is right, and the reason they never had children wasn't a choice, then Meghan's story isn't just about ambition. It's about loss. It's about the lengths people go to protect the image they built, even if it means burying their pain so deep that it consumes them. And perhaps the most heartbreaking part of all is that the woman who longed for a perfect public life never got the private one she once dreamed of. But the story doesn't end there. Because hidden inside Trevor's revelation lies a deeper mystery. One that connects old friends, secret letters, and a discovery that would change everything he thought he knew about her. A truth that wasn't just about fertility or family. It was about betrayal, pressure, and a secret that was never supposed to reach the light. And when Trevor finally found out what that secret really was, it didn't just break his heart. It broke him. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. It began like every Hollywood dream does, with timing, luck, and that electric spark that no one can predict. But behind the smiles, the red carpets, and the champagne toasts, something darker was already taking root. Trevor Engelson first saw Meghan Markle not as the global figure she'd become, but as a hungry, passionate actress trying to make her mark. She was confident but kind, funny yet guarded. And that contradiction, that mysterious pull, drew him in instantly. He was producing small but promising films, surrounded by agents, scripts, and endless meetings. Meghan, in contrast, was hustling for auditions, navigating the brutal side of the entertainment world. Yet when they met, everything else faded. It was as if two people who had spent their lives pretending for a living finally found someone they didn't have to pretend for. Or so they thought. From the very first date, Trevor was smitten. Meghan's voice, her intelligence, the way she spoke about wanting to change things rather than just act, it captivated him. Friends said he talked about her constantly. She, on the other hand, seemed intrigued by him. The stability, the success, the fact that he wasn't starstruck by her beauty. It wasn't a fairy tale at first sight, but it was close. They started attending industry events together, quietly, no fanfare. Meghan didn't have the fame yet, but she had presence. People noticed her. She had that aura of someone who knew she was destined for something bigger. And Trevor admired it. He wanted to help her get there. He used his connections, offered advice, and even helped her network. It wasn't about control. He genuinely believed in her. But love built on ambition can sometimes blur the lines between partnership and projection. Late nights turned into early mornings. They'd talk about scripts, ideas, dreams. He'd joke that one day she'd win an award and forget to thank him. She'd laugh, leaning in, promising she never would. Those promises, years later, would echo painfully in his mind. At first, their bond seemed unshakable. She'd fly to meet him when he was on set. He'd show up to her auditions, cheering her on from the sidelines. When she finally landed her breakout role in Suits, Trevor was the first person she called. She cried with joy. He told her it was just the beginning. But success has a strange way of rewriting love stories. Have you ever noticed how the closer someone gets to their dreams, the farther they drift from the people who helped them get there? That was Meghan. And Trevor didn't see it happening until it was too late. The first signs were subtle. She'd cancel plans because of last-minute calls. She'd go quiet for days when filming. Then, when they reunited, she seemed distracted. He thought it was stress, but it was distance. Emotional distance disguised as ambition. Still, they laughed. They traveled. They shared inside jokes about Hollywood gossip. They were happy, or at least convincing enough to look it. Their friends described them as solid. He adored her. She admired him. Yet there was always a sense that Meghan was holding something back. Trevor noticed it in her eyes when people brought up family or the future. At parties, friends would joke, "When's the baby coming?" Meghan would smile, say someday, and change the topic. Trevor would chuckle, pretending not to notice how her smile tightened every time. Behind closed doors, though, those questions cut deeper. He wanted to start a family. She wanted to start a movement, her own. He'd try to talk about it gently, in moments that felt safe. Over dinner, on vacation, after a long shoot. But Meghan would always deflect, sometimes with humor, sometimes with silence. One night, as they walked along the beach near Malibu, he brought it up again. "What do you see for us in 5 years?" he asked. She paused, looked at the ocean, and said, "I just want to see what's possible for me first." That line would replay in his mind for years. He thought she meant her career, that she needed to prove herself before settling down. But what if it was more? What if she was hiding something she couldn't even say aloud? Their friends never saw the tension. Publicly, they were picture perfect. Private dinners, couple vacations, smiling photos. But when the cameras were gone, their conversations grew colder. Trevor would try to understand what changed. She would accuse him of not supporting her dreams enough. He'd back down, feeling guilty for even asking. He didn't realize then that love wasn't the problem. It was fear, hers, and soon, it would consume both of them. There was one night, one Trevor never forgot. They were at home, watching old photos from their early days. He mentioned how happy they looked. Meghan went quiet. Then she whispered, almost to herself, "Sometimes I miss that version of me." He turned to her, confused. "What do you mean?" She smiled faintly. "The version that didn't have to be perfect all the time." That was the first time he saw the cracks in her confidence. For a fleeting second, he saw vulnerability. But she quickly shut it down, pretending it never happened. He didn't push. Maybe he should have. Because that vulnerability wasn't just emotional. It was physical, too. There were times when Meghan seemed withdrawn after certain medical appointments. She never explained them, saying they were routine. Trevor didn't question it. But her moods after those visits, sad, reflective, sometimes distant, told a story she wasn't ready to share. And it wasn't until much later that he'd realized those appointments were connected to the one thing that tore them apart. Still, in those early days, he believed love could fix anything. He believed she'd open up eventually. He believed wrong. When they married in Jamaica, the ceremony was filled with laughter, sunshine, and friends. It felt like paradise. But even there, Trevor sensed something off. Meghan smiled for the cameras, kissed him under palm trees, danced barefoot in the sand. Yet in quieter moments, when the music stopped, her eyes seemed distant again, as if she was somewhere else entirely. After the wedding, life didn't feel like a new chapter. It felt like a waiting room. He was waiting for her to let him in. She was waiting for something she couldn't name. Maybe peace, maybe escape. The woman who once promised him forever was slowly slipping into a version of herself he barely recognized. She was more calculated now, more guarded, almost like she was rehearsing for a role she hadn't told him about. And maybe she was, because just a few years later, She would step onto the world's biggest stage, leaving Trevor behind in the shadows. But before that transformation, before the royal reinvention, there was still a moment, one final chance, when their love could have survived. One conversation that could have saved it all. And it started with a single, painful question. Why don't we have a child yet? Trevor asked it not out of pressure, but out of hope. And what Meghan said next wasn't an answer. It was the beginning of the end. Because that night, under the glow of a California moon, she told him something that would haunt him for years. Something that made him realize their love wasn't just fading. It was built on a truth she could never bring herself to share. And when he finally discovered what that truth really was, it didn't just break his heart. It shattered everything he thought he knew about her. But what exactly did Meghan say that night? And why did Trevor walk away from the woman he once called his forever? What came next would reveal the first cracks in their perfect Hollywood love story, and they would never heal. The transformation didn't happen overnight. It never does. It starts small, missed dinners, unanswered texts, long silences disguised as, "I'm just tired." But underneath it all, something was shifting inside Meghan Markle. Something Trevor couldn't stop, no matter how hard he tried. After Suits took off, Meghan's world exploded. She was no longer just another actress hustling in Los Angeles. She was Rachel Zane, the breakout star with the smile everyone noticed and the poise that turned heads. She was finally on magazine covers, doing interviews, rubbing shoulders with the people she used to watch on TV. Fame wasn't a dream anymore, it was reality. And reality was intoxicating. Trevor couldn't help but be proud. For years, he'd watched her struggle, fight for roles, get rejected, and come back stronger. Seeing her succeed was everything he'd wanted for her. But success comes with a cost. Have you ever loved someone so much that you didn't notice when they started changing? When their voice got colder, their eyes more distant, and their time more precious? That was Trevor's life now. At first, he chalked it up to stress. New fame meant more responsibility. Press, contracts, schedules. But then he started to realize something more painful. Meghan wasn't just changing because of her career. She was changing because she wanted to. She started talking differently. Her circle shifted. Suddenly, their old friends, the ones who'd been with them through their lean years, were too negative. Trevor noticed that their dinners, once filled with laughter, turned into strategy sessions. Meghan was always planning, always thinking ahead. She'd ask questions like, "Do you think people see me as serious? Should I focus more on humanitarian work? Do you think I should move to New York or maybe London next year?" It wasn't the curiosity of an actress. It was the calculation of someone sculpting their future image. And Trevor? He was starting to fade into the background of her masterpiece. The little things started first. She'd travel without telling him until the last minute. She'd stay longer on set. Calls turned shorter, texts less affectionate. When he flew to Toronto to visit her on the Suits set, he felt like a guest in his own marriage. She introduced him to the crew like a polite stranger. "This is Trevor," she said once. "Not my husband, just Trevor." It stung, but he smiled through it. Because that's what love does. It makes excuses for the other person's distance. He told himself it was temporary, that fame wouldn't change her heart. But it did. Have you ever seen someone become the person they always wanted to be, and realize that version of them no longer needs you? That's the cruelty of ambition. Meghan started reading different books, listening to new mentors, aligning herself with people who could help her brand. She wasn't cruel about it, just distant, like she was rehearsing for a bigger stage. Trevor once joked, "You're becoming too famous for me." She laughed, but didn't disagree. He'd watch her take calls late at night, whispering about opportunities, scripts, PR angles. And when he'd ask, "Who was that?" she'd just say, "Work stuff, don't worry." But he did worry. Not because he didn't trust her, but because he could feel her slipping away. Every marriage has breaking points, and theirs came quietly, not in screaming fights, but in silences that said more than words ever could. She started saying things like, "I need to focus right now," or "I'm just not ready for the next step." The next step, he knew what that meant. Family, children, commitment beyond the surface. Trevor was patient, almost painfully so. He loved her enough to wait, even when waiting hurt. But deep down, he sensed something she wasn't saying. Sometimes, when he'd mention children, she'd go pale. Her tone would change. "Let's not talk about that now," she'd say. You know how crazy my schedule is." At first, he accepted it. Then, one night, her mask slipped. They were sitting in their LA home, dinner untouched. Meghan looked exhausted, staring blankly at the TV. Trevor reached over, gently holding her hand. "You've been quiet lately," he said softly. "Are you okay?" She didn't answer right away. Then, almost too quietly to hear, she said, "I just feel like I'm running out of time." "Time for what?" he asked. She looked at him for a long moment and then said, "To become who I'm supposed to be." That line haunted him. Because what did that mean for him? Was he no longer part of that vision? Trevor wanted to be her anchor, but Meghan didn't want to be anchored. She wanted wings. When she began traveling for charity events, interviews, and brand deals, she'd call less often. He'd watch her on TV, radiant, eloquent, perfect, and feel like he was watching a stranger. He tried to visit her in Toronto again. This time, she seemed almost annoyed by it. "You didn't have to come," she told him, half smiling. "It's so hectic right now." He laughed it off, pretending not to notice the coldness in her tone. But something inside him broke a little. He was losing her, and she wasn't even trying to stop it. There was a dinner one night, after one of her magazine shoots. Trevor made reservations at their favorite restaurant. He'd even brought flowers. But when she arrived, she was on her phone the entire time. When he asked about her day, she answered with one-word replies. Finally, he said quietly, "You're not here, Meg." She looked up, surprised. "Of course I am." "No," he said. "You're somewhere else. Somewhere I can't reach." She didn't respond. She just looked away. That silence said it all. Later that night, Trevor told a friend, "It's like she's living two lives, and I'm only in one of them." And he was right, because Meghan was already imagining a future beyond the one she'd built with him. Her eyes were set on bigger horizons, international fame, humanitarian recognition, perhaps even royalty. But before she could rewrite her story, she had to erase parts of her past. And Trevor, unknowingly, was one of them. Still, she wasn't heartless. There were moments when the old Meghan would return, the woman who laughed freely, who kissed him without checking her reflection first. Those moments kept him holding on, believing they could still fix things. He told himself she just needed balance. That once her career stabilized, they could talk about family again. But balance was never Meghan's goal. Control was. She'd started seeing everything, her life, her image, her marriage, through the lens of strategy. And Trevor was beginning to feel like an accessory in her story rather than a partner in it. One evening, during a quiet argument, he finally said, "It feels like you're not in this anymore." She paused, staring at him coldly. "Maybe I'm just not in that phase of my life right now." That sentence hit harder than any fight could. Because love isn't a phase. Marriage isn't a project. But for Meghan, everything was timing. And Trevor was becoming an inconvenient reminder of a life she wanted to move beyond. The next weeks were a blur. They drifted further apart, both emotionally and physically. He buried himself in work. She did the same. But underneath the calm, the unspoken truth grew louder. She was done pretending. Still, Trevor didn't know the half of it. He didn't know that her avoidance wasn't just ambition, it was pain. A secret buried deep beneath the surface. A secret she couldn't bring herself to share. And when that secret finally came to light, it wouldn't just explain why she avoided motherhood. It would explain why their marriage never stood a chance. Because ambition might have driven her away, but heartbreak sealed her silence. And when Trevor finally uncovered what she'd been hiding, it turned his world upside down. But before that revelation, one final argument would change everything. It began with a simple question, and ended with the look that told him their love story was already over. What was that question? And what truth did Meghan refuse to face even then? It happened on an ordinary night, the kind of night that never looks important until you look back and realize it was the beginning of the end. Trevor had cooked dinner. Meghan was home from filming for a few days, tired but glowing in that way she always did when her name was trending. They laughed a little, talked about friends, about her schedule, about nothing that really mattered. Then, without warning, he asked it. "So, have you thought any more about starting a family?" The air changed instantly. The laughter faded. Meghan's fork paused in midair. She didn't even look up. He hadn't meant it to sound like pressure. It was just a question, a dream shared between husband and wife. But the silence that followed told him it was something else entirely. She finally said, I don't want to talk about that right now. He tried again, gently. We've been married 2 years, Meg. I just want to know what you see for us, someday. Her answer was a sigh, quiet but sharp. Someday isn't now, Trevor. You know that. That night marked the first time he felt truly shut out. At first, he told himself it was timing. Her career was soaring, and he didn't want to stand in her way. But something about the way she avoided the topic gnawed at him. Every time he tried to bring it up, every time he imagined their future, she recoiled. Have you ever been in love with someone who flinches when you talk about forever? It's like reaching for a hand that keeps slipping away. The next morning, Meghan was distant. She left early, claiming she had errands. Trevor sat alone in the quiet house, staring at the half-finished breakfast and wondering what went wrong. He started noticing a pattern after that. Every time life slowed down, every time things could have turned intimate or real, she found something new to distract herself with. A new charity project, a trip, a dinner invitation, anything that kept the conversation off the subject of children. When friends teased them about when the little Engelsons would arrive, Meghan would smile that perfect Hollywood smile and say, "We're focusing on work right now." It was always the same line, rehearsed and smooth, the kind that left no room for follow-up questions. But Trevor could see the cracks behind it. Sometimes, when she thought no one was watching, her face would fall just slightly. Her eyes would glaze over, as if she'd drifted somewhere painful. He asked himself 100 times what she was hiding. Was she afraid? Did she not want kids at all? Or was there something else, something she couldn't say? One evening, after a charity gala, the tension finally boiled over. They were driving home in silence. The car lights passed across her face, revealing exhaustion and something darker, fear. Trevor said softly, "You don't even look happy anymore." She turned to him. "I am happy. I'm just tired." He nodded, but his heart wasn't convinced. "You used to talk about family, remember?" Her jaw tightened. That was before everything changed. Before what changed? She didn't answer. She just stared out the window and whispered, "You wouldn't understand." That sentence hit like a blade. Because how can someone love you and still keep you in the dark? For days afterward, Trevor replayed that conversation in his mind. What wouldn't he understand? He tried to brush it off, tell himself she'd open up eventually. But deep down, he already knew something was breaking. Their next attempt at talking about it came weeks later, during a rare weekend together. Trevor thought a relaxed atmosphere might help. He poured wine, lit candles, made her favorite pasta. Midway through dinner, he tried again. "Meg, I just want to know what's going on. If it's about timing, we can wait. But if it's something else..." She cut him off. "Why does it matter so much to you?" He blinked. "Because I love you. Because I want us to have a life together." Her voice rose, sharper now. "My career is finally happening, Trevor. I can't throw it away just because you think it's time for kids." He didn't shout back. He just stared, hurt and silent. Then she said something that chilled him. "Maybe I'm not meant to be that kind of woman." He wanted to ask what she meant, but she left the table before he could. He sat there for a long time, listening to the echo of her words. Maybe I'm not meant to be that kind of woman. What does that even mean? He thought. Not meant to love? Not meant to be a mother? The arguments didn't stop there. Each one chipped a little more away from what they once had. He'd bring up the subject gently. She'd snap. He'd back down, then feel guilty for even trying. Their home started to feel like a stage set. Smiles for visitors, silence when the door closed. Sometimes, in the quiet moments, Trevor would find her sitting on the balcony, staring at nothing. He'd wrap his arms around her from behind and whisper, "You know I'd never pressure you." She'd nod, but her body stayed stiff. He could feel she was fighting something internal, something she didn't trust him enough to share. Then came the night that changed everything. Trevor was cleaning the living room when he noticed a stack of papers on the table, medical forms, partially tucked under a magazine. His heart skipped when he saw her name. He didn't read much, just enough to catch a few words. Consultation, procedure, fertility specialist. He froze. His first instinct wasn't anger, it was worry. He waited for her to come home, rehearsing how to ask without sounding intrusive. When she arrived, tired and distant, he handed her the papers gently. "Meg, I saw these. Are you okay?" Her face went pale. For a second, she looked terrified. Then, in a calm but icy tone, she said, "You had no right to look at that." "I didn't mean to," he said quickly. Why didn't you tell me?" She turned away. "Because it's my body, Trevor. My life. He stepped closer. I know. But we're married. You can tell me anything. She shook her head. Not this. That was it. No explanation, no reassurance, just a wall. That night, Trevor slept on the couch. Not because she asked him to, but because the space between them had become unbearable. In the morning, she was gone. No note, no call. Just gone. She returned a few days later, acting as if nothing had happened. But he could tell she'd been crying. Her eyes were swollen, her smile forced. When he asked again, she whispered, "Some things you can't fix." Those words broke him more than shouting ever could. He realized then that this wasn't just about ambition or timing. It was about pain, something deeper, something that had left scars she refused to reveal. He started wondering if the truth had less to do with choice and more to do with heartbreak. Maybe she couldn't have children. Maybe she'd known for years. Maybe she couldn't bear to say it out loud. And if that was true, he understood her silence, but it didn't make the distance any easier. From that point, every conversation felt fragile. He tried to act normal, hoping love could patch the cracks. But Meghan seemed to be preparing for something else entirely. She started traveling more, spending more time on her phone, retreating into herself. He would wake up some mornings and find her sitting by the window, lost in thought. When he asked what she was thinking, she'd smile faintly and say, "Nothing." But her eyes told a different story. There was pain there, regret, and maybe guilt. Trevor couldn't fix what he didn't understand. And that's what destroyed them, love without answers. When their marriage finally collapsed, it wasn't with shouting or scandal. It was with quiet resignation. Two people who had loved each other deeply, now living separate emotional lives. He packed his bags for a film project and didn't hear from her for weeks. When he came home, her things were missing. On the kitchen counter, there was only an envelope. Inside, her wedding ring. No note. No explanation. Just the ring. And that's when he knew. The woman he loved was gone long before she left. But what Trevor didn't realize was that the secret she carried, the one that had broken her, broken them, was about to come back in ways neither of them could have predicted. Because while he was mourning the marriage that ended, someone else was whispering about what really happened behind closed doors. And when Trevor finally heard it, it wasn't anger he felt. It was heartbreak all over again. But what was that secret? Who told him? And how did it lead to the discovery that would change his entire understanding of their love? The answers waited just around the corner. And they would turn heartbreak into revelation. The rumors began the way they always do in Hollywood. Soft, uncertain, and whispered over wine glasses at rooftop parties. At first, they were just background noise, harmless chatter between publicists and assistants. But whispers have a way of growing teeth. And soon, they weren't just gossip, they were truth cloaked in denial. Trevor didn't want to believe it. He'd spent years defending Meghan, even after she left. But when something is repeated enough times by enough people who claim to know, even the strongest love begins to tremble. It started with a call from an old friend, someone in the production world who'd worked with Meghan early on. Trevor answered casually, expecting small talk. Instead, the voice on the other end said quietly, "There's something you need to know. I don't think she ever planned to tell you." Trevor's stomach dropped. "Tell me what?" The friend hesitated. "About the clinics. The treatments. The things she was doing when she said she was on set." At first, Trevor laughed. It sounded absurd, like another cruel rumor spun for clicks. But the tone in his friend's voice was too grave to ignore. She was seeing doctors, not in LA, in New York. Private specialists. They called her by another name. He felt the room tilt. His pulse thundered. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying," the friend continued, "that Meghan was hiding something about her health, something to do with fertility. You didn't hear it from me." And then the line went dead. He sat there for hours, phone in hand, trying to process what he'd just heard. His mind replayed every conversation, every silence, every moment she'd turned away when he mentioned children. Suddenly, they all made sense. She hadn't just been avoiding him. She'd been protecting herself. But from what? Was it shame? Fear? Or something far more complicated? He tried to push it out of his mind, but the whispers kept coming. At a film party weeks later, he overheard two producers talking about Meghan. "She's smart," one said. "She knows how to hide her scars." The other replied, "Yeah, but you can't hide medical files forever." Trevor's glass nearly slipped from his hand. He walked away before they could see his face, heart pounding. Have you ever felt the weight of everyone knowing something you don't? Something about your own life, your own marriage? It's like standing under a spotlight, naked, while the world whispers around you. Trevor started asking quiet questions. Not accusations, just curiosity masked as small talk. But Hollywood has a strange way of rewarding silence. The more he asked, the fewer people spoke. Until finally, one person broke the wall. It was Meghan's former makeup artist, a woman who'd been close to her during her suit's years. She met Trevor for coffee after weeks of dodging his calls. Her eyes were tired, cautious. "She trusted me once," the woman said softly. "I shouldn't even be saying this." "Please," Trevor urged. "I just want the truth." She sighed, lowering her voice. It wasn't that she didn't want kids, Trevor. She couldn't. Or at least, she thought she couldn't. He froze. "She found out years ago," the woman continued. "Something about complications, scarring, hormones. I don't know all the details." She was devastated, but she refused to tell anyone. Said it would make her look weak, like damaged goods. "She made me promise not to say anything." The words hit like a tidal wave. Every fight, every tear, every moment of distance, suddenly it all had meaning. He whispered, "Why didn't she tell me?" "She didn't know how," the woman said. "You were her safe place, and that made it harder. She didn't want you to look at her differently." He felt the air leave his lungs. All those nights he thought she didn't care, she was actually breaking quietly inside. It was heartbreaking, but it was also infuriating. Because love built on half-truths always collapses. Trevor thanked her and left, numb. He sat in his car for nearly an hour, unable to move. His mind spiraled, flashes of Meghan smiling for cameras, laughing on talk shows, preaching authenticity. Yet behind all that confidence, she was carrying a secret too heavy to bear. And as the gossip continued spreading through Hollywood, the whispers grew darker. People said she'd been to multiple doctors, that she'd tried treatments overseas, that she'd considered surrogacy years before the word ever entered the royal vocabulary. Some even claimed that one of those procedures went wrong, that it left lasting effects she never recovered from, emotionally or physically. Trevor didn't know what to believe anymore. He didn't want to dig deeper, but he couldn't stop. Every time he tried to move on, another piece of the puzzle found him. A former assistant mentioned Meghan visiting a discreet clinic in Beverly Hills under a pseudonym. A journalist hinted that her team had paid to suppress certain stories. A studio contact said she once left mid-shoot for an emergency that no one was allowed to document. And through it all, Trevor stayed silent. Because what could he say? That the woman he'd loved had built her world on secrets born of pain? That her ambition was fueled not just by hunger for success, but by terror of being exposed? He began to see her differently, not as a manipulator, but as someone who believed she could only be loved if she was flawless. It broke his heart all over again. There was one night, months after their split, when Trevor saw Meghan's face on a magazine cover at a grocery store. The headline read, "Meghan Markle, ready for motherhood?" He stared at it for a long time, frozen between rage and sorrow. The woman on that glossy page looked radiant, powerful, untouchable. But all he could see was the woman who once cried quietly beside him, whispering, "You wouldn't understand." He walked out without buying anything. The whispers never stopped. If anything, they got louder as Meghan's fame grew. By the time she was dating a prince, the people who once knew her best had all gone quiet, as if some unspoken agreement had been made. No one talked about the clinics anymore. No one mentioned the tears, the failed procedures, the secrets. Hollywood had moved on, but Trevor hadn't. He didn't speak publicly. He didn't confirm or deny anything. But those who knew him said he carried a sadness that never really left. He threw himself into work, producing films, staying out of headlines. Yet behind the calm exterior, the ghosts of those whispers followed him everywhere. Have you ever kept a secret for someone long after they've forgotten you? That's what Trevor did. Even when friends encouraged him to write a tell-all, he refused. "I'd rather protect her," he once said quietly, "even if she never protected me." And that's when people realized his silence wasn't bitterness. It was grief. And that's when people realized his silence wasn't bitterness. It was grief. Because love doesn't always end in hate. Sometimes it ends in heartbreak and unanswered questions. Still, one question refused to die. What exactly did Trevor discover that made him walk away for good? The whispers about fertility were painful enough. But there was something else, something darker that no one dared say aloud. Some claimed she'd made a decision, one that haunted her and reshaped her forever. Something involving a choice no woman should have to face. And if that rumor was true, it explained everything. Her distance, her coldness, her determination to rebuild herself into someone untouchable. Trevor would never publicly confirm it, but those closest to him said that one night, long after their divorce, he finally told a friend through tears, "She didn't betray me. She betrayed herself." Whatever he meant by that, no one dared to ask. But one thing was certain. The secret Meghan couldn't share was now the burden Trevor couldn't forget. And when that burden finally found its way into the hands of the media, through a leak no one saw coming, the story the world thought it knew would shatter once again. Because the truth, as Trevor would soon discover, doesn't stay buried forever. And the person who unearthed it wasn't a stranger. It was someone much closer than anyone could have imagined. But who was it? And what did they find? What came next would unravel everything. Not just for Trevor, but for Meghan herself. The truth doesn't always arrive with a bang. Sometimes it slips in quietly, in the middle of an ordinary day, and suddenly everything you thought you knew about someone shatters in a single breath. Trevor was at work when the message came through, a short text from a mutual acquaintance he hadn't heard from in years. It simply read, "You need to see this." Attached was a photo. It wasn't scandalous, at least not in the way tabloids define scandal. It was a photo of Meghan outside a private medical building in Beverly Hills. No makeup, sunglasses, head down, alone. The timestamp was from 2 years before their separation, around the time their arguments about children began. He stared at it for a long time. His heart pounded. It wasn't the picture itself that destroyed him, it was what it confirmed. She had been there. She had been hiding something all along. He called the number back immediately, but it went to voicemail. The message was short, almost apologetic. "I shouldn't have sent that, man. But you deserve to know. She wasn't honest with you. None of us knew how bad it was." Trevor sat there for hours after that. The noise of the office faded. All he could hear was the dull hum of his computer and the echo of her voice in his head. "You wouldn't understand." He did now. That evening, he went home and pulled out the box, the one filled with the remains of their life together. Photos, notes, old tickets. The letter she wrote him on their first anniversary, the one that said, "You're my home, Trevor, always." He read it again, tears blurring the ink. How could someone who once called him home shut him out of her deepest pain? Have you ever loved someone so much that the truth feels like betrayal, even when you know it came from fear? That's what Trevor felt that night. Not anger, not vengeance, just a deep, suffocating grief. Still, he needed closure. So he did what most people would do. He started looking for answers. Carefully, quietly. He contacted one of the clinics mentioned in the whispers, not to pry, but to confirm if her visits were even real. Of course, privacy laws meant they couldn't say much. But when he gave the false name he'd overheard, the receptionist paused just slightly before saying, "I'm sorry, sir, we can't confirm that information." That hesitation told him everything. He hung up, shaking. It wasn't just rumor. It wasn't gossip. It was truth. But that truth came with layers. And the deeper he looked, the darker it became. A week later, another message arrived, this time from a different source. A woman claiming to have worked as a nurse's assistant at one of the clinics. "I remember her," the message said. She was quiet, beautiful, scared. It wasn't about choice. It was about loss. Trevor's hands trembled as he read it. Loss. The word echoed. He realized then that the woman he'd married hadn't just been running from him. She'd been running from grief. He replayed everything in his mind. Her silences, the way she'd tense at the word family, the random tears, the long, unexplained absences. It all made sense now. She hadn't avoided the conversation because she didn't care. She avoided it because she couldn't bear to relive the pain. And yet, in trying to protect herself, she destroyed the one person who would have stood by her no matter what. That's the cruel irony of secrets. They're meant to shield you from pain, but they end up creating more of it. When Trevor finally confronted her, months later, after the divorce was final, he didn't go to accuse her. He went to understand. They met at a small cafe in West Hollywood. She arrived late, wearing dark glasses, her expression unreadable. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Then Trevor finally said, "You could have told me." She didn't deny it. She just stared down at her cup, silent. Was it true, he asked softly, everything people said? About the treatments? Her voice was barely audible. I didn't want you to see me that way. That way. Broken. The word cracked between them like glass. He reached for her hand, but she pulled away. You weren't broken, he whispered. You were just hurt. There's a difference. But she shook her head. You don't understand, Trevor. In this world, being hurt means being weak. And weak women don't survive. That was the last real conversation they ever had. He left the cafe feeling both heartbroken and strangely at peace. Because finally, after years of wondering, he understood. She hadn't left because she stopped loving him. She left because she couldn't bear to let him see her without her mask. And maybe, in some tragic way, that was her version of love, protecting him from the weight of her truth. But Hollywood doesn't let secrets stay buried. Not for long. A few months later, tabloids began hinting at medical challenges from Meghan's past. Nothing explicit, just shadows of a story that sounded eerily familiar. Trevor recognized details only she could have shared once upon a time. Someone from her circle had talked. He was furious, not for himself, but for her. Because now the thing she feared most, exposure, was becoming real. Reporters started calling him, offering money, asking for comment. He said nothing. Every headline cut him a little deeper. Sources claim Meghan Markle's hidden struggle. The ex-husband who knew too much. He wanted to disappear. But silence, again, was his only weapon. Then came the final piece of confirmation. A confidential letter sent anonymously to his office. No name, no signature, just a simple note that read, "You were right to love her." But she could never forgive herself for what happened. Inside was a single medical invoice, heavily redacted, but unmistakably hers. The date matched one of the weeks she claimed to be filming. He sat in his office, staring at the paper. Everything was true. And in that moment, Trevor realized he didn't need to tell the world anything. The truth was already too painful to relive. He folded the letter, locked it in a drawer, and promised himself he would never speak of it again. But promises like that don't last forever. Because when pain simmers long enough, it seeks release, even in whispers. Years later, when he finally broke his silence, he didn't talk about clinics or rumors. He simply said, some things you can't fix. Some pain you just learn to carry. It was the closest he'd ever come to telling the truth. And though his words were simple, they held the weight of everything unsaid. The grief, the betrayal, the compassion. He never wanted revenge. He wanted understanding. And yet, that quiet confession would light a fire in the media that would spiral far beyond anything he intended. Because once the truth was out, even in fragments, it couldn't be controlled. The world would soon take his pain and twist it into something sensational. Headlines, documentaries, analysis, speculation. And as Meghan's new life and royalty began, Trevor's old Heartbreak was being rewritten for public consumption. But there was still one piece missing, one moment he'd never shared with anyone. A discovery not of papers or photos, but of a message she left behind. A message that would reveal the depth of her guilt and the heartbreaking reason she truly walked away. And when Trevor found that message, everything he thought he understood about their story changed again. Because it turned out, the real truth wasn't what she hid. It was why she hid it. There's a moment in every love story when the foundation cracks. For Trevor and Meghan, it wasn't one explosive fight or dramatic betrayal. It was quieter than that, the slow collapse of something that once felt unshakable. After the truth surfaced, after the photo, the whispers, the confirmations, Meghan began to unravel. The woman who had built her identity on control was suddenly surrounded by chaos she couldn't contain. She started living like someone constantly bracing for an earthquake. Always watching, always calculating, always one step away from panic. Trevor saw it happening, but didn't know how to stop it. He still loved her, even after everything. He wanted to help her heal, to prove that the truth didn't make her unlovable. But she didn't want comfort, she wanted control. And that's what destroyed them. At home, she became unpredictable. One day, she'd be affectionate, apologetic, even vulnerable. The next, cold and distant, snapping over the smallest things. It wasn't cruelty, it was fear. Fear of being seen, fear of pity, fear that the man who had once adored her now saw her as fragile. Have you ever watched someone you love build a wall right in front of you and realized it's to keep you out? That's what Trevor lived through. She'd spend hours scrolling through scripts, articles, press coverage. Every headline about family, every gossip piece about her personal life chipped away at her. The pressure to be perfect, to look successful, to sound unbroken, consumed her. In public, she smiled brighter than ever. On talk shows, she was charismatic and funny. In interviews, she said all the right things about independence and empowerment. But behind closed doors, Trevor would find her sitting alone in the dark, staring at nothing. He'd try to reach out. "Meg, talk to me," he'd say softly. "I'm fine," she'd whisper. "I just need to focus." But focus on what? On work. On image. On not falling apart. He noticed the post-it notes she left scattered around their house. Words like discipline, perseverance, legacy. It was as if she was coaching herself through her own breakdown. Then came the lies. Not malicious ones, but small ones. The kind people tell when they're terrified of being exposed. She'd say she was at a meeting, but he'd find a receipt from a clinic. She'd say she was fine, but her eyes told a different story. He didn't confront her every time. He was afraid to push too hard and watch her crumble. But lies have gravity. They pull everything toward them until the truth is impossible to hold on to. Their communication broke down completely. Texts became short. Calls went unanswered. And when they were in the same room, they felt miles apart. One night, after another silent dinner, Trevor said, "I don't even know how to talk to you anymore." She didn't look up. "Then don't." That was it. No argument. Just exhaustion. He sat there for a long time, staring at her, realizing that the woman across from him wasn't his wife anymore. She was an idea of herself, a version she'd built to survive. The next morning, he found her packing a small suitcase. She said it was for a retreat, but he knew better. "Are you leaving me?" he asked quietly. She stopped, her hand trembling over a folded dress. "I don't know." "What do you mean you don't know?" Her eyes filled with tears. "I don't know how to fix this, Trevor. I don't know how to be what you need when I'm still trying to figure out who I am." He stepped closer. "I don't need perfect, Meg. I just need you." She looked at him for a long time, then whispered, "That's the problem." And with that, she walked out. She came back days later. She always did, but each return felt more temporary, like she was practicing her goodbye. During those weeks, Trevor realized something painful. Meghan wasn't trying to save their marriage. She was trying to save herself. He started to see the patterns more clearly. Her drive wasn't just ambition, it was escape. Every new project, every public appearance, every carefully crafted narrative was a way to drown out the sound of her own guilt. Because deep down, she knew she'd built her success on a foundation of secrets. And secrets have a way of poisoning everything they touch. Then came the breaking point, the night the mask fell completely. They were at a charity event in Malibu. Cameras flashed, people laughed, champagne flowed. From the outside, they looked like a perfect couple. But Trevor could see the strain in her eyes. She was smiling too hard, laughing too loud. When they got home, the silence was unbearable. He turned to her and said softly, "You don't have to keep pretending." Her voice trembled. "If I stop pretending, I fall apart." He took a step toward her. "Then let me catch you." For a moment, she looked like she might. Tears welled in her eyes. Her lip quivered. And then, just as quickly, the mask returned. "No," she whispered. "You don't get to fix me." He froze. "That's not what I'm trying to do." "Yes, it is," she said, her voice cracking. "You want to save me, and I can't be saved." Her words sliced through the air. Trevor didn't respond. He just stood there, watching as she walked into the bedroom and shut the door. He didn't see her again that night. When he woke up, she was gone. That was the night he finally accepted the truth. The woman he loved had been swallowed by the life she created. The more she tried to control it, the more it consumed her. He wanted to believe it wasn't over, but deep down he knew. The collapse wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, inevitable, like a building slowly sinking under its own weight. In the weeks that followed, Meghan's public image soared while their private life disintegrated. Interviews, photo shoots, smiling appearances. Every headline painted her as Hollywood's next great humanitarian. Trevor watched it all from the sidelines, hollow inside. Friends told him to move on, to date again, to forget. But how do you forget someone who still exists everywhere? On screens, in headlines, in the voice inside your head that still says her name when you wake up. He tried. He really did. But every time he saw her, every time she spoke about authenticity or compassion, it reopened the wound. Because the woman the world adored wasn't the woman he knew. Or maybe she was, just buried beneath layers of pain and performance. The collapse of trust wasn't a single moment. It was every moment she looked at him and lied. Every time she smiled when she wanted to cry. Every time she pushed him away to protect an image that was already falling apart. By the time the divorce papers arrived, he wasn't even angry. He signed them quietly, almost relieved that the storm was finally ending. But just when he thought it was over, one more piece of the past found him. Something she'd left behind, intentionally or not. A letter. Folded, unsealed, tucked into one of her old notebooks he found while cleaning the house. It wasn't addressed to anyone, but as soon as he saw her handwriting, he knew it was hers. The letter read, "If you ever find this, please know I did love you. I just couldn't love you the way you deserved. I was too afraid you'd see me for what I am and walk away. So I walked first." Trevor sat there, staring at the words through tears. He'd waited years for an explanation, and now he had it. But it didn't bring peace. It brought more heartbreak. Because even in her confession, she was still protecting him, still trying to shoulder all the blame herself. He folded the letter and placed it back in the notebook. That was the moment he realized the truth wasn't just about infertility, ambition, or lies. It was about shame, a kind of shame that eats people alive. And the cruelest part? She didn't have to hide from him. He would have stayed. He would have loved her anyway. But now it was too late. The woman who'd once been his whole world was gone, replaced by an image that belonged to everyone but him. Still, he couldn't bring himself to hate her. He pitied her. He mourned her. And when he finally spoke publicly about their past years later, that pity would be the tone of his voice. Gentle, heartbroken, human. But before that quiet confession came, the world would find out the truth on its own, through a leak no one expected. A leak that would drag both their names back into the headlines. And when it did, Trevor would face a choice. Defend her, or finally tell the world what really happened. What he chose next would shock everyone, including Meghan herself. Divorces rarely happen in one moment. They happen in pieces, slow, invisible fractures that you don't notice until the whole thing collapses. For Trevor Engelson, the collapse wasn't an explosion. It was a quiet, calculated fade-out, designed with precision by the woman he still loved. It started with an email. No shouting match. No final conversation. Just a message with words so polite, they felt surgical. "Trevor, I think it's time we accept that we've grown in different directions. I'll have someone reach out to handle the legal details. Please don't make this harder than it needs to be." He read it 5 times, waiting for the punchline, waiting for the warmth that used to follow her words. But there was none. It was as if a stranger had written it. He tried to call her. No answer. He tried again. Straight to voicemail. That night, he sat in their empty living room, staring at her photo on the wall, their wedding picture from Jamaica. Her smile in that photo looked so alive. Genuine. He couldn't reconcile it with the woman who had just erased him through a few lines of text. He checked her social media the next day. There she was, radiant, smiling at a red carpet event in Toronto. As if nothing had happened. As if their marriage had never existed. The tabloids didn't even catch on. That's how clean it was. No drama, no leaks, no speculation. Just silence. Trevor didn't understand it then, but Meghan had mastered the art of the invisible exit. She left relationships the way she left rooms, elegantly, without mess, without warning. And yet, beneath that grace, there was cruelty. Because silence, when you love someone, is the loudest rejection.